on Acast and wherever you get your podcasts.
This is Rebalance with Kamal Santamaria.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Rebalance. Back after a little break. And this week, looking at one of my core subjects. Oh, not Donald Trump. That guy is just a little too much right now, even for me. It is the media, and more specifically fairness, balance, and accuracy in the media. What you're about to hear is very much a New Zealand story, but if you are listening from elsewhere, it is no less relevant. The players involved don't necessarily matter because it is about the type of unfairness and imbalance and inaccuracy which can be seen in media anywhere, and that should really shock anyone, anywhere. Now, before I get started, I do want to explain who the players are, because it is not just a case of a single news outlet being reprimanded by the regulators here. There is a kind of a web of connections which needs setting out. So we have the Broadcasting Standards Authority, the BSA. That is the regulator of broadcast media here in New Zealand. The public can complain to the BSA when they believe standards have been breached. We have Warner Brothers Discovery New Zealand, the local subsidiary of the big multinational media group, which are frequently referred to just as WBD. Now, it owns a TV channel, which is called 3, and last year, to save costs, Warner Brothers Discovery, WBD, shut down 3's newsroom, completely closed it. It was a dramatic move. We know cutbacks in the media are pretty common these days, but closing the doors entirely was a massive move. So now, WBD pays a company called Stuff, a local media group which operates New Zealand's most popular website. It pays them to produce a nightly 6 p.m. news bulletin for 3, and it's called 3 News. Okay? So this is a complaint to the Broadcasting Standards Authority about a TV news item which screened on 3 News. Oh, and one more thing. The audio you'll hear in this podcast is not from the actual news item or the BSA. For transparency's sake, the voiceovers have been generated using AI, which unfortunately didn't have any New Zealand accents, so I had to use mostly Australian ones. Oops. Right, let's go.
Rebalance with Kamal Santamaria.
On July 26, 2024, 3 News broadcast a special investigation into the group Action for Smoke-Free 2025, or ASH.
To a special investigation now, and concerns are being raised over links between anti-smoking organisation ASH and the pro-vaping lobby. ASH director, Ben Udan, visited Australia in February as the country looked to ban disposable vapes. 3 News can reveal his trip was coordinated by the founder of a group which has taken money from vape businesses and whose founding chair has advocated for vaping areas in schools.
So the angle is that a group which says it is anti-smoking is being backed by another group which has links to vaping. The inference seems to be that ASH's motivation to stop people from smoking is not entirely altruistic, because they're being directed by lobbyists who want to get people hooked on their own addictive alternative. Political reporter Bridie Whitten went on to report.
Parents Against Vaping and public health academics are raising concerns about ASH's links to the pro-vaping lobby in Australia. ASH runs the Year 10 survey into smoking and vaping attitudes and behaviours with funding from the Ministry of Health. Its next survey is due at the end of the year, but its views towards vaping are outliers in New Zealand, which has invited backlash. Ben Udan's trip to Australia was coordinated by Dr. Alex Wodak. His organisation, the Australian Tobacco Harm Reduction Association, or ATHRA, was paid nearly $20,000 from e-liquid and e-cigarette companies in 2018. A spokesperson for Vape Free Kids is concerned about ASH's relationship with ATHRA.
ASH and its director, who was interviewed for the story, Ben Udan, were not happy with this story, feeling it was essentially a setup which made Ash look bad. So they lodged a complaint. Now, this is one of the peculiar things about making a complaint over broadcasting standards. In the first instance, you have to complain directly to the broadcaster, which in this case is 3's owner, Warner Bros. Discovery. Then, if you don't like the response you get, you can escalate it to the Broadcasting Standards Authority. But frankly, how many broadcasters are going to look at their own work and say, yeah, this was absolutely shoddy, and we apologize for it? No. They defend accusations, as well as their staff and reputation. So it's no surprise that WBD didn't uphold Ash's complaint. It said Ash was provided with, quote, sufficient information about the nature of the planned broadcast and ample opportunity to comment, end quote. WBD also said many of the allegations made in the broadcast were put to Mr. Udan for comment, and that the broadcast otherwise included a range of perspectives on vaping to provide balance. So, unsatisfied with that response, Udan and Ash took the next step and made that complaint to the BSA. They said Ash's position had been misrepresented, that it wasn't given a right of reply, and that it wasn't fully informed of the nature of the story nor given a fair opportunity to comment. Accuracy, balance, and fairness all under threat. And my goodness, were Ash's concerns warranted. In its investigation, the BSA reviewed emails that had been sent between Ben Udan and the journalist Bridie Whitten, and a 30-minute interview recorded over Google Meet, from which Whitten used soundbites for her story. And in those 30 minutes, Udan repeatedly asks Whitten, what is the story about? Now, it was initially presented as, quote, researching a political story on the vaping landscape. But in the transcript of the interview, I can count 6 instances of Udan asking where the story had come from, what it was about, and where certain allegations had originated. He was given generic and what looked like disingenuous answers.
The sort of main thrust is trying to understand sort of what the vaping picture is in New Zealand, and what positions and views people are holding. I think when Ash is playing such an important role and, as you know, helping to shape government policy, all of those questions are intertwined. The allegations, well, they are not. I've just given you an opportunity to respond to these links that are in the public sphere already. There's no specific, no one's accusing you of anything.
Remember, this was a so-called special investigation, and yet Whitten was trying to frame the whole thing as background research. Now, there are emails from before the interview which show Whitten definitely did mention the contentious Australia trip to Udan. But it was never presented to him as the crux of the whole story, which is exactly what it was. In fact, here's her question on the supposed links to the Australian Tobacco Harm Reduction Association, or ATHRA.
Can you see, though, the sort of tension there when Alex Wodak has, his company, you know, ATHRA? It did come out that it was started with this initial funding from vape businesses. But do you see why there are sort of concerns about, you know, potential links or links with yourself and someone like that, when he has this history?
Honestly, it takes a few reads of that question to find out where it's actually going. Perhaps a more direct way of asking it for this special investigation would have been, have you taken money or been directly supported by ATHRA and or Alex Wodak? Do you see a conflict of interest there? We've spoken to people who are concerned about a link between your two groups. Or something like that. But what's utterly extraordinary is that none of Udan's answers, comments, or denials about links between Ash and ATHRA were included in Whitten's story. None of them. And it's not like there weren't enough.
I was very, very clear that I wouldn't do anything that was funded by tobacco or vaping, including, you know, that I wasn't going to go forward with whatever. I was absolutely clear, and I tried every assurance there was no conflict with any of that funding, or who was hosting me. I seek the assurance that I'm not being funded by vape companies, and I won't take money off vape companies, and I would never have, or tobacco companies as well. Look, I can understand how people would want to make that look like I'm being funded by vaping companies, which is absolutely not true. So you'll understand I feel like I'm on the end of some tenuous ways of trying to link me with some insidious force, which I do everything I can to categorically not do.
The answers were there. The denials to the very specific angle of the story were there. And yet, the reporter left them out. All of them. This is what I mean when I talk about agenda-driven journalism. There seems to be little regard for the facts, because it's the narrative which comes first. A story or an angle or an idea, it's presented to the public as fact, instead of just presenting the facts and letting people make up their own minds. What that is not even journalism. It's a ruse, and it needs to be called out. In its ruling on accuracy, the BSA said it found the report overall was misleading, and the broadcaster did not make reasonable efforts to ensure it did not mislead.
Ash's viewpoint and direct responses to the issues provided important factual context. These responses were available but were left out of the broadcast.
I honestly think it could have gone one step further and said the report was intentionally misleading. After all, what else can it be when a journalist leaves out crucial information which it had been provided with and which fundamentally alters the story it is telling? Ben Yudan also says he wasn't aware the interview was for broadcast on television. He was under the impression it was a long-form piece for the Stuff website. He says he didn't conduct himself as formally as he might have had he known he was being interviewed for television. Now, Stuff had only recently taken over production of 3 News, and WBD says Witten did inform Yudan that Stuff now operated across multiple platforms, including 3 News. In its ruling, the BSA said it couldn't determine exactly what Yudan was told, but it noted that
We do not think all participants would know or expect that Stuff content may be broadcast on 3 News. We encourage the broadcaster to remain alert to this when ensuring people are fairly informed.
broadcast news has changed a lot. It used to be that the only way to be on TV was for a camera crew and reporter to come directly to you and record an interview on a videotape. Now, of course, we have Zoom, Teams, Skype, Google Meet, all of which are considered broadcast acceptable. And given Witten had been solely a print journalist for Stuff, certainly her LinkedIn profile shows no TV exposure or experience, then I think she probably needed to be very clear that this was an interview for a specific TV news item. But wait, there's more. Because 4 days after the original story, 3 News was at it again. This time it was a short live cross report, again from Bridie Witten, saying that a high school in Wellington was refusing to allow its students to take part in ASH's annual survey, one which it conducts about smoking and vaping habits. Live on air, Witten said,
3 News has obtained this email from the school, saying it does not want to participate in the survey until ASH acknowledges the harm that vaping is causing for young people. It says this harm is significant and totally separate to the harm that smoking causes. It says, quote, principals have spoken out on this issue in the media, but I have not heard you, ASH, do the same.
So we have a school taking a stand and the email to prove it. Witten even says this email, so I assume it was being brandished in front of the camera, as reporters love to do. But there was a crucial piece of information missing. The email was from 2021, 3 years earlier. And what's worse is that when ASH complained to WBD, again, the decision was not upheld on the grounds of it was the reporter's first live cross into a television broadcast. She'd written the date into her script, but in the pressure of a live TV environment, she forgot to mention it. But also that, quote, even without the 2021 date included in the live cross, the audience was not materially misled nor lacking in context. Now look, I remember my first live cross. I was 20 years old. It actually wasn't bad considering my relative inexperience, but I was definitely crapping myself. So yes, a reporter's first live cross doesn't always go well. But this wasn't just a little mistake, something forgotten. this was a complete omission of information, and actually part of a wider pattern of misinforming the viewers. Thank goodness the BSA saw differently to WPD, because I think anyone can see that not including when something actually happened creates a misleading narrative, especially when you've done a one-sided report on the same group 4 days earlier. But back to the story, because 3 News talked about a school refusing to take part in the survey. However, Ash had told Witten in an email the day before the report was aired that the survey is actually an opt-in survey. There's no compulsion on anyone to participate. Ash invites 600 eligible schools every year, and around half of them choose to take part. But it just doesn't sound as controversial, does it? Refusing to take part is a much better headline, and also a much more misleading one. Witten concluded her live report by saying,
But of course, the organization's stance on youth vaping is that young people, most young people who vape, are not addicted, they are simply experimenting.
"Oh, of course." It makes it sound like Ash isn't really concerned about youth vaping. Just a follow-on from the first report, which tried to show Ash was being supported by pro-vaping lobbies. It ignored what Ash had said in that same email the day before, which stated, Ash shares concerns about increasing youth vaping in Aotearoa, New Zealand. We do not want young people, most of whom have never smoked, to vape. The preferred approach is to prevent young people from starting to vape in the first place, and at the same time supporting young people who vape to stop. In its decision, the BSA said the report
materially misrepresented Ash's position on youth vaping as outlined in the statement provided to the reporter, excluding a fair presentation of Ash's response to the issues and including one sentence that made Ash look worse, would have significantly altered viewers' understanding of the story.
So, once again, 3 News was picking and choosing what it put into its reports. Frankly, it starts to look like it is the one with the agenda against Ash. Part of the BSA's ruling was that 3 News make an on-air apology. The following was read out on April 22, 2025, in relation to the first report.
The BSA concluded the broadcast created a misleading, unbalanced and unfairly negative impression of Ash, by favouring critical perspectives and failing to adequately present Ash's position.
And on the second report,
the BSA found this misleading and unfair, as it presented outdated information as breaking news without telling viewers the information was from 2021. The BSA concluded that 3 News failed to ensure accuracy by not providing important factual context. The comment from Ash, included in the report, did not adequately respond to the issues raised.
So basically it was reporting on what the BSA had found. The apology itself was fairly muted.
3 News regrets the errors that were made in these circumstances. The authority ordered the broadcast of this statement to publicly acknowledge the breach of broadcasting standards to our audience, and to remedy the potential damage done to Ash's and its director's reputation.
Now this is no surprise. No broadcaster wants to make an on-air apology. Though to call this an apology is a bit of a stretch. What 3 News said was the bare minimum. It only spoke of regrets, and made it clear that it was the BSA forcing them to make this statement. And so we return to a point I made at the start of this piece. Where does the fault and responsibility lie? Warner Bros. Discovery New Zealand is the company which the complaint was made against, but it's broadcasting a product which is made for it. It's unclear if WBD has any say or control over the content of the nightly news bulletin, but as the broadcaster, it presumably has some sort of legal provisions in place, for example, indemnification, for such complaints and any issues of liability. 3 News itself is the news outlet, but really it's just a brand. 3 News is, for all intents and purposes, a rebadged version of the old TV3 News bulletins. Same structure, same style, made and presented by a lot of the same people, but under a different banner and management. So I think the responsibility has to fall on Stuff, and the reporter, and the editorial staff who allowed both stories to go on air. In this case, WBD deferred to Stuff when asked for comment.
Stuff regrets the errors that were made in this circumstance and accepts the authorities' findings. We are committed to upholding the highest journalistic standards across all of our channels and products. We have now produced almost 303 news bulletins for Warner Brothers Discovery. With this BSA decision the only finding against our reporting.
Now, like the one aired on 3 News, I just don't know what to make of that statement from Stuff's editor-in-chief, Keith Lynch. He's right in that this is the sole finding against 3 News from the BSA, and long may it stay that way. But it's a massive one. There's no wiggle room. 3 News unequivocally screwed up, and so maybe this wasn't the time to be highlighting an otherwise unblemished record. Will anything change? Well, my hope is that lessons are learned from this sort of thing, but experience teaches me that that kind of hope is likely misplaced. When I started out in journalism in the late 1990s, we used to joke that you should never let the facts get in the way of a good story, or that a beat-up like this was just maximizing the story's potential. All good fun, just having a laugh. But it's not a joke. All the details I've given here, taken from emails, interviews, broadcasts, and an investigation by the Broadcasting Standards Authority, show how journalists are apparently willing to ignore the facts and contexts, the ones which don't suit a particular narrative, so they can produce the story they want, and more importantly, a story which gets the most eyeballs and clicks. Because that's what matters these days. Why is trust in media so low? Because of this sort of reporting and journalistic attitude. I don't advocate any abuse of the media, be it from an anonymous online troll right up to the President of the United States. But if this whole story sounds familiar to you, then you'll know pretty easily where that lack of trust has come from.
The Balance. Journalism without agenda.
So there you go. And I am still honestly quite shocked by this whole story because it wasn't just a slip-up or a mistake or something which can be easily explained away. It was so plain to see how the facts had been manipulated into something else and how the people involved got busted. If you want to go back over this entire piece and, really check those details again, it was actually born out of a Substack newsletter which I wrote earlier this week. My Substack is called Keeping Them Honest, and you can find it at kamalsantamaria.substack.com. And that is it for this week's Rebalance. Any comments, just email me, kamal@thebalance.website. Look us up on social media as well, at The Balance Feed. Thanks for listening. Thanks for downloading and subscribing too. It is really helpful when you do both of those things. And I will look forward to seeing you again next time.
Rebalance is a production of the Balance.website and is brought to you by Acast. For more, visit shows.acast.com/rebalance.